just discussed, the law library. I am the representative on the law library. We will finally have Wi-Fi downstairs and a password that takes you 2 minutes to enter. The logging jamboree in September, on September 4. We need some hatchet throwers, saw. Are you going to come again, Gary?
Yeah, I thought
we're
were
going to be partners? Yeah. Okay, got it. So if any of the other men on the board would like to come to the logging museum, we would welcome to see your skills.
Last year, Marita and I teamed up, and Marita was throwing the axe. And every time she'd take this axe back, she'd go to throw it, she'd say, "Tom, try on." The axe. She didn't hit the target once, so Tom, I think
you're safe for now, anyway.
So this year, I think maybe we'll get a big picture and put it on the target.
On the Visitors Bureau, I didn't know if the board was interested in writing the city a letter about the Visitors Bureau. Tom, I don't know what your thoughts are, staying where they are. My concern on writing a letter is the city would ask us for money, or the Visitors Bureau, for their $2,000. They're going from $0 to $2,000 a month for rent.
Are they going to stay in the same location, or are they finding a new location?
Well, if they charge them $2,000 a month, they're going to go to a new location. But I didn't know if the board wanted to write a letter of support of keeping there, how you might want to manage that.
It's my understanding that they are negotiating with the city right now.
Yeah, I think that's a city visitor center issue. I'm not really
that's
interested
fine.
in jumping in the middle of it.
Got it.
I think that's a wonderful location for the visitor center, quite frankly, and I think it's been a huge asset for the cities. I'd be very disappointed if they moved, but I don't know that we want to get right in the middle of that.
And talking about the City of Angels, the trees are coming down at Cal Fire in Altaville, and we're going to have a goodbye picnic to the trees, and we're going to try and do a fundraiser, CENTS, for sequoias, and see if we can get some more sequoias planted. Area 12 Agency on Aging, of which I'm the board representative. The ARA funds, we received $33,000 to expand the nutrition program in Calaveras, and Common Ground, who's our provider, is hoping to be able to continue the additional people who are being served by them. Then I'm saving the last one, this last item, on administration of justice. We are going to be discussing Proposition 19. And Proposition 19 is medical marijuana. And I was just wondering where the board might be. This is only a subcommittee. It is not going to, it will be going to the board of directors. All the subcommittees are making comments. It's controversial among the supervisors in in California, but I do represent this board. I didn't know if you wanted me to recommend a no position, a yes position, a neutral position.
Are you polling us?
I'm polling you.
Do you have a recommendation?
Personally or professionally?
Very good, Steve. Very good. Very good.
I'm recommending a neutral position. I think it's very controversial. The impact, there's a huge impact for law enforcement. The other part of the proposition, it allows counties to regulate themselves. So even if Proposition 19 passes and Calaveras does not want to implement 19, we can vote no for that. If Calaveras chooses to do 19, or any other county, city or county, because this county could go one way, the City of Angels another way, then we could also vote through the community, through the registered voters, whether we should be taxing it, taxing the medical portion of marijuana or the non-medical portion of marijuana. And it could increase the workload for Brian Moss's department. I mean, there's a lot of issues that are not being addressed by this proposition, but I will go with the board's recommendation.
If you're starting over here, I would support your position of neutrality on this.
Okay.
I also would support that.
Mr. Walensky.
I think it's up to the voters to decide. I also support neutrality.
Okay. Mr. Tryon.
I would support a yes position on the marijuana initiative.
Okay. Will be voting for a neutral position. All right. Ms. Boyce.
Nothing to report today.
Mr. Jones?
Nothing for me.
Okay, thank you. We're going
The
to
three
take
of us have something in common.
How are you voting on the marijuana, Jim?
We will take a 5-minute recess, and we will go into our study session on the noise ordinance. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move to the study session on the proposed noise ordinance. This is a study session. The board cannot make decisions, but we can give direction. I'm going to let Captain Macedos do the conversation. I will ask the board if they have any questions or comments. I will then open it to the public for any questions or comments. Any questions you have, we're just going to take the questions and hold them to the end and answer them at once, either with the sheriff's office or with county council. Okay, so everyone will have the opportunity to speak on this proposed ordinance. Captain Macedo, would you like to proceed?
Thank you. Good morning. Jim Macedo. I'm a captain with the Sheriff's Office. I'm going to start with a few introductions. First, Janice Elliott with the County Counsel's Office is in the back corner. She is largely responsible for the language of the ordinance. She was a great help and assistance. Pat Ross with the Sheriff's Office. She is a Community Services Assistant. And finally, Richard Craig with BRC Engineering. Richard's in the back near Miss Elliott. He can answer some of the more technical questions that are beyond my science background and my expertise. Today will be an overview of the proposed draft ordinance. This is a decibel-based noise ordinance. As you recall, at the board's request, we last held a study session on April 6, 2010. At that time, we received some direction from the board of supervisors and input from the public. We took that information back to our offices and developed the proposed draft. Due to busy schedules and the difficulty in finding some language and equipment and information regarding this, it's regrettably taken longer for us to bring this back before the board. This presentation is long and it's dry, so please bear with me. I'm going to try and move through this as quickly as I can. I do want to let everybody know that the PowerPoint presentation excludes the definitions, so if you have to refer back to definitions, those are in your packet. We did that just kind of in a manner to save time and also to save what is already a long PowerPoint presentation, to try and condense it a little bit. If you have questions about the meaning of a definition, you're going to have to refer back to that, and that's in the interest of time. I would also like to make a request. If there are questions regarding specifics of the ordinance, if you could refer to the page that the ordinance, and preferably a paragraph to help us find it quickly, because it's kind of lengthy. And with that, I'm going to get started. This is an ordinance adding Chapter 9.02, Noise Control to the Calaveras County Code. The Board of Supervisors of the County of Calaveras hereby ordains as follows. Section 1, Chapter 9.02, Noise Ordinance Control is hereby added to the Calaveras County Code. Next slide. Board of Supervisors finds and declares that excessive noise is a serious hazard to the public health, welfare, and safety of the people of the unincorporated area of the County of Calaveras, and is contrary to the public interest by interfering with restful sleep, communication, relaxation, and the full use of one's property, and inadequately controlled excessive noise is a persistent danger to the health and welfare of the residents of the incorporated area of the County of Calaveras, and the level and frequency of disturbing excessive, offensive, or unusually loud noise within the jurisdictional limits of the County of Calaveras threatens to increase unless reasonably controlled, and the creation, making, causing, or continuation of such excessive noise that is prolonged or unusual in time, place, and use will detrimentally affect the public health, comfort, convenience, safety, welfare, and quality of life of the residents of the unincorporated area of the County of Calaveras. And it is the intent of this chapter to prevent excessive noise that may jeopardize the health, welfare, or safety of the citizens of the unincorporated area of the County of Calaveras or degrade the quality of their lives, and thereby to promote and secure the protection of the public health, comfort, convenience, safety, welfare, peace, and quiet of the unincorporated area of the County of Calaveras, and, it should say, its people from excessive levels of noise. Sound level limitations. No person shall cause, suffer, allow, or permit the operation of any sound source on property or any public space or public right-of-way in such a manner as to create a sound on property or any public space or public right-of-way in such a manner as to create a sound level that exceeds the background sound level by at least 10 dBA during daytime hours. And in parentheses, it's there 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. that those hours can be discussed. And by at least 5 dBA during nighttime hours, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. When measured at or with the real property line of the receiving property, which shall constitute a noise disturbance, provided, however, that if the background sound level cannot be determined, the absolute sound level limits set forth in Table 1, which we'll get to shortly, maximum permissible sound levels, provided, I think that's a typo, provided if the sound level source in question is a pure tone. The limits of Table 1 shall be reduced by 5 dBA. Next slide, please. If it is residential property, the limits, again, this is open for discussion, are set at 65 dBA or 75 dBA L max. If other than residential property, it is set at 70 dBA or 80 dBA L max. The other option we have is that those sound level limits can not differ if the board so chooses for residential property or commercial property.
What is L max?
I'll let rather than me, Brian, explain that, I'll let Mr. Craig explain that for
We
you.
can come back to it.
Next slide, please.
Where it is.
Sound level standards on site. This is for a long-term measurement. The hourly LEQ, decibel, again, daytime, 55, nighttime is 45. The maximum level is 70 for daytime and 65 for nighttime. Next slide, please. Continued. Each of the sound level standards specified in Table 1 shall be reduced by 5 dB for simple tone noises consisting of speech and music. However, in no case shall the sound level standard be lower than the ambient sound level plus 5 dB. If the intruding sound source is continuous and cannot reasonably be discontinued or stopped for a time period whereby the ambient sound level can be measured, the sound level measured while the source is in operation shall be compared directly to the sound level standards of Table 1. This topic is still under review, and it deals specifically with pleasure motorboat noise. Section 1, the following measurements shall be conducted only by an enforcement officer or persons qualified by training to perform these measurements, acting in the presence of an enforcement officer. Operating manuals or other literature provided by the sound level meter manufacturer should be consulted for both recommended operation of the instrument and precautions to be observed. A field calibration of the sound level meter shall be performed immediately before and after each sequence. That will be done regardless of what we're measuring, not just specifically under motorboat noise. And there is basically a process, a departmental process that shows you how to basically take these measurements, and that goes along with the manufacturer's recommendations, which we'll briefly get into later. Pleasure motorboat engines manufactured before January 1, 2002 shall not exceed a sound level of 90 dBA LEQ as measured adjacent to the exhaust outlets by a sound level meter utilizing a water-based measurement testing procedure consistent with the Society of Automotive Engineers International Marine Technical Committee testing procedures or successor procedures which are recognized by the American National Standards Institute.
Captain, see, we have most of this written. You know, again, to go back to, in your interest of time, if there are just some key things that you would like to point out in some of these instead of going through each one.
I know the pleasure boat issue was going to be a topic, so I wanted to make sure I hit that. Would you like me to continue or finish the motorboat noise? Or?
Well, yeah, since we're going to talk about that, but everything else, if you just want to key in on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pleasure motorboat engines manufactured in or after January 1, 2002 shall not exceed a level of 88 dBA. LEQ is measured adjacent to the exhaust outlets by a sound level meter utilizing a testing procedure consistent, again, with the Society of Automotive Engineers. Specific testing procedures shall be prescribed by duly adopted policies and procedures of the Environmental Health Department. I think item 4B, measurement of a sound level that meets the criterion set in subdivision A does not preclude the conducting of a test of sound level to determine compliance with the above subsections referred to in this section. Next slide. Section A, compliance with this article shall be determined using methodology described in this section. Sound measurement, except as otherwise provided in this article, shall be made with a sound level meter using the A weighting network at a slow meter response, except that a fast meter response shall be used for impulsive type sounds. I realize that's difficult to kind of swallow that term, but I think that A weighting is important. You're going to hear about that later from the engineer. Calibration of the measurement equipment. Basically, I'm going to highlight the calibration. There is a system and a process which the meters are going to be calibrated both before and after and on a routine basis consistent with not only the manufacturer's recommendations, but also that will allow us for the measurements to hold up in court. I'll synopsize that for you. Next slide. Here's an alternative. As far as practicable, sound will be measured while the source under investigation is operating at normal routine conditions. If not practicable, sound will be measured under other conditions, including but not limited to design, maximum, and fluctuating rates. All sound tests shall be conducted in accordance with the following procedure. If practicable, all sources contributing to the sound to the point of measurement shall be identified. I know this was important, and this topic came up because there was some concern that people were going to be cited for a noise level higher than which they were contributing, in so much as if there were multiple boats or multiple houses having a party, how do you just measure the one house or the one boat? The measurement instrument must be calibrated using a calibrator recommended by the measuring instrument manufacturer. I think I've already gone over that. Next slide, please. Recertification. Obviously, we will comply with all recertification. Outdoor measurements. No outdoor measurements shall be taken during wind periods when wind speeds, including gusts exceeding 15 miles per hour, without a windscreen recommended by the measuring instrument manufacturer. I've had a chance to look at those windscreens. Mr. Craig showed us a demo of that. Under any conditions that allows the measuring instrument to become wet, or when the ambient temperature is out of the range of tolerance of the measuring instrument. We can talk about that also. The report that will be completed by the Sheriff's Office will include the date and day of the week, the times of the calibration, the weather conditions, the identification of the monitoring equipment, normal operating cycle, ambient sound level, background sound level, and This has a sketch on there that's still kind of up for discussion within the Sheriff's Office as to whether or not we need a sketch. We may not need that every time. Some of the instruments actually will, I hate to use the term spit out, but they'll print out a small document that could be either attached to a citation or used as a citation or attached to a report. Prior to taking the sound measurements, the investigator shall explore the vicinity of the source in question and identify any other sound sources that could affect measurements to establish approximate location. I know that's been a concern in the past. When measuring continuous sound or sound that is sustained for more than 1 second at a time, the measuring instrument shall be set for an A-weighting, slow response, and the RAND, if the measuring is designed to read levels over different ranges, shall be set to the range in which the meter reads closest to the middle of the scale. The minimum and maximum readings shall be recorded to indicate the range of monitored values along with the central tendency average most often displayed. Basically, you're just kind of looking at a high, a low, and an average. And that's, again, for long-term or longer-term noise. The measuring instrument shall be placed at a minimum height, and this, again, is according to manufacturer's recommendations, and this was consistent with what we've seen in looking at other ordinances, at a minimum height of 3 feet above the ground or from any reflective surface, and when handled, the microphone shall be held at arm's length and pointed at the source at the angle recommended by the measuring instrument's manufacturer. Next slide. I think it's important to note Section H, the monitoring session shall last for a period of time sufficient to ensure that the sound levels measured are typical of the source in question. If the background levels shall be subtracted from the measured sound levels of the source of interest by using Table 2 to determine the sound levels from the source of interest alone. Again, I saw a lot of questions about people being cited or accused of creating noise that they were not responsible for. If the ambient sound level is less than 3 dBA higher than the background sound level, this source cannot be derived, and violation of this chapter cannot be sustained. This table shows the difference between the ambient background sound levels and a correction factor. Next slide. This is the bulk of the ordinance, and it includes some specifics, so I'm going to go through this. The following activities are specifically prohibited: operating, playing, or permitting the operation or playing of any radio, television set, loudspeaker, stereo, drum, musical instrument, or similar device which produces, reproduces, or amplifies sound in such a manner as to create a noise disturbance for any person other than the operator of the device. Using or operating any loudspeaker, public address system, or similar device between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. the following day, such that sound therefrom creates a noise disturbance across a residential real property line. Any noise, commotion, or sound resulting from a party between the hours of 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. of the following day, which creates sound in violation of Section 9.02.030 of this chapter. For purposes of this section, party means a gathering for social or entertainment purposes at a private residence or other location, but does not include sound generated by a valid commercial use, such as a bar or restaurant, that is in compliance with all the other applicable requirements of local, state, and federal law and regulations. Following are exempt from this chapter: sound from school athletic or school entertainment events, sound from emergency signaling devices or for the purpose of alerting persons to the existence of an emergency, sound from a burglar or septic alarm, sound from church bells or chimes, sound from construction activity, provided that all construction in or adjacent to residential areas shall be limited to daytime hours between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. Again, those hours are up for discussion here today, unless otherwise subject to the conditions in a valid discretionary land use permit that addresses construction noise associated with a project. Sound from gunfire occurring while hunting, consistent with all state laws on private property. Sound from situations within the jurisdictional area of the Federal Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Sounds in situations within the jurisdiction of the FAA. and sound from any land use for which a valid discretionary land use permit, such as a conditional use permit or administrative use permit, has been issued by the county prior to the effective date of this ordinance, or which may be issued by the county after the effective date of this ordinance, and included the imposition of conditions regulating sound impacts, and which are separate from and independent of this chapter. Sound from existing legal non-conforming uses or existing permitted commercial, industrial, or mining uses, which do not significantly change in existing on-site activities or result in a change in the number of days or daily hours of operation. Sounds generated from county-sponsored or county-approved events and celebrations. When the source is being analyzed as a stereo system with low-frequency signals as part of its output, the stereo shall not cause a C-weighted level of 10 dB or greater above the C-weighted ambient level at a distance of 10 feet from the source or the complainant's real property line, which is greater. Exempt sound from any ag operations under Chapter 14.20 of this code. Sound from any activity subject under Chapter 6.10 of this code. Next slide. Violation and enforcement. The first violation of any provision of this chapter is an infraction. An infraction is similar to a traffic ticket. It is not a misdemeanor or a bookable offense. However, if the person refuses to sign the infraction, then they could end up going to jail. But this is similar to a traffic ticket where you are issued a citation and a fine. The fine is in this section. Will be forthcoming, and that includes court fees. So it's similar to a traffic ticket. Any subsequent violation of this chapter by a person within 12 months from a conviction for violating any provision of this chapter or that forfeits bail in connection with a prior violation of this chapter is a misdemeanor. If this were charged as a misdemeanor, then the report would be submitted to the district attorney's office. The district attorney would then decide whether to file charges. And on misdemeanors, people can be booked into the county jail. Would we actually do that? It would really depend on the circumstances surrounding the events and the history. All violations of this chapter constitute a public nuisance, which in addition to or in lieu of any other remedies in this section may be abated in any manner set forth in Chapter 8.06 of this code, including but not limited to abatement or issuance of administrative citations. The fine, and this again is up for discussion, shall be $150 for the first citation, $250 for the second, and $500 for the third. If you recall, at the last study session, I brought to you some similar fines relating to building code violations, animal control violations for reference. A late payment charge shall be paid to the county, the amount of 10% if the fine's not been paid. There's some time constraints in which the fine must be paid. Next slide. The enforcement officer enforcing the provisions of this chapter shall maintain records of all administrative costs associated with enforcement and enforcement proceedings and shall recover such costs from the property owner or person in control from which the sound originates as provided herein. The hourly rate charged for staff time shall be the weighted hourly rate. Administrative costs shall be defined as all staff time extended which is reasonably related to enforcement and shall include, but not be limited to, investigation, site inspection, monitoring, preparation of summaries, reports, correspondence, telephone contacts, and meetings with affected parties. If it is determined by the noise control officer that a violation of the provisions of this chapter exists, the noise control officer shall give 2 notices to the owner of record or any person in control of the property from which the sound source is originating, which notices shall state the existence of the violation, that the county intends to charge the property owner for all administrative costs with enforcement, and state the owner's right to object to the imposition of such costs. The notices shall be in substantially the following form. And then I'm not going to go over the format with you, but I do want to stop there just for a moment. You're fine, Pat, and talk about that. It is going to be our intent to, if we do take enforcement action, again, this is intended to be a compliance tool, but if we do have to take action, it is our intent to cite the person causing the noise, where we will contact or look into issuing a cite to a property owner I think those occasions will be rare, and those will be the occasions in which we have a property owner that knows that knowingly has an ongoing nuisance where they're allowing the noise and they're not making any reasonable attempt to abate the noise. At that point in time, we would start looking at the property owner, but it is going to be our absolute intent to resolve this issue with the person or persons causing the noise as opposed to the property owner. We did include that in there because there are some property owners, again, that aren't going to respond as a normal citizen would and try and abate noise. So I know there's some concern about people who have rental properties or property managers. It's not our intent to cite property managers. Obviously, they're renting the location out, and the people responsible for the location at that time are the ones creating the noise. So those are the folks we're going to be dealing with. Again, this is just an example of the letter we would be sending out, warning or notifying the individuals involved of the costs incurred in the process of recovering our costs. Next slide, please. Again, this is another letter which will specify the address of the property and the amount, and it also notifies them of a hearing. If the person wants to contest the charges, they will be able to file a request for hearing or an appeal with the sheriff's office, and at that point in time there is a process for conducting a hearing. It's just more explanation of the hearing process and what occurs. Next slide. More notices with due dates. Next slide. This just goes into how we are going to evaluate our costs for recouping those. And I don't anticipate us doing this a lot. I mean, it certainly could happen, but and we want to make sure that the language is strong and appropriate and the process is in place. Next slide. Okay. With that, I'll take questions. Again, I may have to call up Ms. Elliott or Mr. Craig to answer some of those.
Are there any questions, comments from the board? Steve?
I've got a couple of questions. On page 4, there on section 9.02.030 sound level limitations, there's a phrase that says when measured at or within the real property line of the receiving party. I wonder whether that's ambiguous and might create differences of opinion as to which it would be. There are large properties in my district, and the difference would be considerable. Does somebody walk across a 100-acre property to their line and say that the noise, even though it may be a quarter mile from their house, is difficult at the line, and who makes the decision?
I think that's a good question. That's actually the investigator on scene. And I'm going to go back to the April study session. Deputy sheriffs, law enforcement officers, we have discretion, and that's one of the greatest tools we are given. It's been taken away from us in certain areas, but as it relates to this, we will have discretion. So if, as you mentioned, it is a large piece of property, and we go to that property line and measure it, and while it exceeds the limit there, but that is a remote area where the person is normally never at, and the house is a long ways away, we do not have to issue a citation. The deputy is going to have to use his or her discretion in determining whether or not to issue a citation. Again, this is a compliance tool. The deputy will generally go over and speak to the other party and explain to them what's going on, and he or she could explain to them, hey, technically you are in violation, so you may want to make some changes to your routine. But the deputy does have discretion ultimately, and we're forced to make discretionary choices about what's reasonable and not reasonable all the time. And so that is, we would have to look at the particular circumstance, and the deputy would have to use his or her discretion as to whether or not to issue a citation or move forward with that. In the event the deputy does move forward and issue a citation, again, that will have to come before a judge, and the judge will ultimately determine whether the person is guilty or not. So there's two levels in which it will be looked at fairly, reasonably, and objectively. And so I'm satisfied that, while I understand your concern about the language, I'm satisfied that, that we're going to be reasonable when we make those decisions as to whether or not to issue a cite.
Yeah, I guess my concern would be more in the adjudication of it. If it were to go, that might be an area of legal contention. I'd like to see what Janice has to say about that, not now, but
sure.
At some point today. Secondly, on page 4, we have table 1, maximum permissible sound levels, and then it says if residential property, and then if other than residential property. There is no definition of residential in the definitions of this. Is it going to be done by zoning code,
correct,
or whether or not somebody lives there?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would assume it would be done by land use, but I would have to refer to Janice on that.
Okay, we'll make that note. Thirdly, we have on page 10, paragraph A, a exception that says sound from school athletic and school entertainment events. I like to raise a particular location that has caused a great deal of neighborhood stir in my
Sorry,
district.
I was writing notes in your question. Can you refer to?
Page 10, section 9.02.060, exemptions A. And an exemption is sound from school athletic and school entertainment events. I want to give you an example and see where this fits. Rite of passage, much to the chagrin of some neighbors in a canyon in which sound carries, sometimes gets up at 6 in the morning and has kind of, exercises that are quite loud. Whether that's athletic or entertainment can be debated, certainly in the neighborhood. And there are time issues. If it's at 6 in the morning, people become more irate. If it is at maybe 9 or 10, that's different. So if there's an exemption altogether and that particular exercise is okay at any hour, I would be concerned that we're
The way I understand that, school activities are exempt.
all school activities. This says just school athletic and school entertainment events. So that, I'm kind of,
Okay.
This is on the nuances, but,
Sure.
when you're doing an ordinance, you might as well
Sure.
figure.
School activities. Sorry. Are we finished?
Yes, I am.
Okay. School activities are going to be exempt. However, there may be a school activity upon occasion that might be debatable. And what I mean by debatable, I'm not talking about a functioning school and a routine exercise or a routine event or semi-routine event. But if a new event were to pop up and it's a bunch of students creating havoc without any direction or control from a teacher or an adult, and they want to quantify it as a school event, then we would have to look at that case at that particular time. So while I'm comfortable saying nearly all school events are going to be exempt, but there may be a point in time where somebody wants to challenge the definition of a school event and stretch it to fit their needs, and we'll have to look at that.
I would be making later a proposal just to foreshadow something that says school events held within normal school hours.
And maybe I should have made this clear. You're more than welcome to request
Or entertainment and sports.
But you have-
Those are two different. I'm just this particular thing is be careful.
We need to be careful.
All right. Well, we'll.
You're more than
talk
welcome
about
to
that.
make any language requests today that you so choose. We will review it and see if we can squeeze
Yes.
it in.
Again, I'm trying to separate sports and entertainment events from other things that may cause noise and have the latter be within school hours. But there's a fourth and fifth one. The decibel-based, the board moved in a decibel direction, and now we find that we share a lake with another county that has a distance-based for boating. And I just want to know how you would, let's say we go in two directions on this, how do you take a narrow lake and what does the enforcement look in that regard? Can you, for instance, be in Tuolumne County just across the line in the middle of the lake and violate the Calaveras decibel ordinance?
I think you could, but keep in mind, I just found out about the decibel or the Tuolumne thing yesterday morning. So I haven't even had a chance to look at it, but I'm told it's non-decibel based, it's distance based. As far as how we patrol the lake, generally speaking, the lake's divided and we work our side, but we do go back and forth. I think your question is, what if the noise is emanating from one side coming across the other? It sounds to me, and again, I need to read Tuolumne's, it sounds to me as though it's much easier to cite based on Tuolumne's county ordinance than it will be to ours. It'll be less technical. So we could, in fact, enforce Tuolumne's ordinance. As a deputy sheriff, we're allowed to do that. I'm not saying we would, but that's, I need to spend some more time looking at that ordinance. I was not aware they were even looking into an ordinance until yesterday morning.
I think that would be a tough ordinance to enforce because it says any sound amplification system which can be heard outside the boat from 100 or more feet. Well, how do you know when you're 100 feet? The boats are moving. I think you would have a heck of a time.
Well, that was one of the reasons.
Establishing a criteria, and quite frankly, 100 feet isn't very far. You can hear just about anything if you're, 100 feet away.
That can.
I think you would find that unenforceable the way it's written.
Just a quick go back. As you recall, when we first started this, I was opposed to a decibel-based ordinance, and I preferred these. And after speaking with county council and reflecting upon our local judicial system here, correct. And I firmly believe that today. Having worked with our local judges, I know, in fact, they want a quantitative measurement to show them so that they can make an objective, reasonable decision. So.
Okay, and this is my last question. On the exemptions again, I think that's page 10. But this one's actually on 11M. Sound from any agricultural operation subject to Chapter 14.20 of this code. I'm assuming that it's not in the noise part of the code that you're referring to a particular definition of agricultural activity.
In the county code, yes.
Okay, and what is that?
I don't have that with me, but it basically covers the ag code. We could pull that up for you on a recess if you want to go over that, but I don't have that with me. But thank you.
What's that? I'm on page 11, M on exemptions.
Okay.
And it refers to Chapter 14.20.
I think this appears to be a different code.
This is different than the
Yes.
one? Yes.
It's not section 14.
Well, that's exactly why I'm...
Okay.
That's why I'm asking it, because there are a lot of different definitions of ag and a lot of different codes. There's a state one. I believe you're referring, when you say this code, to the county code.
Right.
And I want to make sure we know what we're talking about.
Janice Elliott, County Council. Yeah, there's two exemptions there, 14.20 and also 6.10. The first one refers basically to what the county has codified from the state law, which is the right to farm ordinance, with definitions in Chapter 14.20. The second part is basically the nuisance animals portions of the code. Both of those two code sections need to be updated also. I do have suggestions from the departments involved in that, but we're keeping that until we deal with the nuisance noise. Those involve specific situations with specific departments that are in charge of enforcing those codes, and they're not related to this particular ordinance, which is why they're exempt from this ordinance.
So it's like the airport, the same kind of things.
Yes.
that fall into other jurisdictional domains.
Yes, they currently exist in our county code. They do need to be updated. There are other areas of our code that if and how you adopt this, for example, there are some very ancient portions of our code that actually address boating on New Maloney's. There's some other sections that we will have to go back and clean up depending on what the board decides to do here so that we have a consistency throughout our code. But right now, those are not part of this nuisance noise ordinance. This is not intended to deal with either nuisance animals such as barking dogs or agricultural nuisance noise either. We have other sections of the code that deal with those two issues.
All right, thank you.
Did you want me to address your other questions?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think your first question had to do with the property line. And if you look at this particular ordinance, and let me tell you, this ordinance is drawn from other counties, primarily Merced and Placer County, which is why there are alternatives in here, because those counties use alternative methods. And since I'm not an expert on noise measurement, I didn't pick. I just put them down there for you. But if you look at I have different page numbers, but if you look at section 9.02.040, which is the first sound measurement procedure listed, if you look at subdivision C, it talks about that the intent of taking the sound measurement is to take it, although it says shall be measured at the property line or at any location within the property of the affected sensitive receptor. Later on it says the intent is so it can be determined whether sound level standards are exceeded at the property line. That is the intent of this. The discretion is left to the officer measuring based on geographical issues. I think the board at one point brought up, what if there's rocks? How do you define the property line? Also, sometimes we don't actually know where the property line is legally. So these are issues that are left to the discretion of the officer based on the information provided at that time. The same intent is in the alternative sound measuring procedure, which is listed under subdivision C. It says measurements shall be under B. II, it says measurements shall be taken at or within the real property line of the affected person. So that is the intent, but you need to leave some discretion here because of geographical restrictions, and Captain Macedo is correct. Ultimately, it's up to the court of law if somebody challenges in court to determine whether or not the standards have been met and there's enough evidence in the record to support the citation. The third question had to do with Table 1, whether it's residential property or other than residential property. Currently, that's not defined. I would suggest that probably the most logical definition would be the use of the property as opposed to the zoning of the property at this point in time, since we do currently allow single-family residential uses in commercially zoned property at this point. When and if you revise the zoning code, we would go back and revisit this particular issue. But right now, I would say it would be based on what the use is that you're measuring at that point in time.
So if somebody's living on the property, that becomes residential,
Yes.
regardless of its zone.
Yes, but if there's also a commercial use on the property that's a legally established commercial use, we would take that into account and use, the other than residential property.
All right.
Yes.
So, Janice, since we have mixed zone, we will or have mixed zoning where you have a business and a residence on the same parcel, and the business can have music and the residents can't.
If it's on the same property, you have a completely different issue here because the property owner is allowing both uses on the same legal property. I would suspect at that point in time you need to deal with the property owner, not the county. This is talking about separate properties, meaning if you own a parcel and you have a house on it and next door is a separate legal parcel with a commercial use on it, then we would be looking at the commercial uses sound generation. But if you live on a piece of property that somebody owns and they have two different uses on them, which is fairly rare, and we will have probably mixed-use zoning codes that will have standards within them. Most of the mixed-use zoning we have right now is subject to a discretionary permit that the county gave through the CEQA process and has those types of issues addressed in the CUP itself. But if you're on one piece of property, your landlord has an issue. And I'm not sure whether you would even get involved in that point in time because both of those are on the same piece of property. And that's not what this is intended to address. And with respect to ROP, George and I recollect that we think they have a CUP, a conditional use permit, which may or may not address the sounds. But the intent of the exemption is that the schools actually have the legal ability to exempt themselves from our zoning codes if they want. This isn't in the zoning code, but they have the jurisdictional ability to do what they want to do, where they want to do. and arguably be a nuisance if they want to be a nuisance. But I would suggest that trying to address a particular issue with a countywide code it would be better to address the particular issue with respect to whatever their permit says.
So the CUP would be the venue.
Yeah, I don't recall what it says, if it has anything about noise, but, when it's hot in the summer, I see people out at Calaveras at 6 a.m. in the morning doing stuff, so I think it would be difficult to define that to address a countywide issue in the schools. Schools are pretty good with their neighbors generally. That's a unique situation.
Yeah, it is.
So, the only other thing, and it's not in response to your question, is the section that says still under review, pleasure motorboat noise. That is taken from Placer County. I just cut and paste. It has absolutely nothing to do with our county because at the time we were addressing this, it wasn't, at least with respect to what my direction from the board was, it wasn't intended to address boat noise on Lake Tulloch. This was intended to address parties and land use activities. And I'm in the same boat as Captain Macedo. I did not see this ordinance till this morning, actually. I did glance through it. I do think it has some issues. We have other areas of our code where it might fit in better to address boat noise on particular lakes and issues, particularly when there are many jurisdictional agencies involved in that. Typically what you do when you have a lake, and it's rare, we are one of those rare situations where you have the feds, the state, and multiple counties, is you form a JPA to address the issues, and that's something that's been in discussion as long as I've been at this county, and it's never come to fruition, but it may be better to address that issue in a different forum than this particular ordinance. It wasn't designed to address boating noise on Lake Tulloch. That was not the intent of this ordinance. I do concur with Captain Macedo that courts want quantitative analysis. That's what they look for. Anytime you get into subjective analysis, you're going to have some due process and equal protection concerns. I think that was
That was it.
That was it.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Gary has a question.
Janice, while you're up there, you spoke about cutting and pasting the boating section of this. Is that why? I trying to figure out why it has a date of 2002.
Yeah, it's just a cut and paste. We just stuck it in there because it was in this ordinance. I left it in there because we were just discussing what do we want to copy, what do we not.
Well, the way it's written, though, anything prior to 2002, and that would be up to the officer to determine when the boat was manufactured.
Yeah.
It could be as loud as...
There's existing boat and waterways laws that deal with that. We know this was a particular topic that the board wanted covered, so we thought it was appropriate to include it and get your direction or feeling on it. It wasn't something that we are trying to strongly support nor strongly oppose. We wanted to give you options related to that particular lake. And later on, I'll talk about existing laws that will cover some of something.
Right.
That's also why it says Environmental Health Department. We would not have that in our ordinance. So that's why it's in italics, too. Any other questions?
I have one, Madam Chair. And on page 11, item I, under exemptions, you say we're exempting sound from any land use for which a valid discretionary land use permit, such as a conditional use permit or an administrative use permit, has been issued by the county prior to the effective date of this ordinance. I was sort of puzzled to read that because what we're doing here is a sound ordinance that basically applies countywide for all zoning areas or zoning codes. Why would you make that an exemption?
Because sound is an element of CEQA. You are required to analyze sound impacts when you approve a conditional use permit. So we were required as part of that approval to address and mitigate any impacts from sound. The CUP is in essence a vested property right by which the owner of that land, because the CUP goes with the land, can operate that particular land use. So by law, you have to exempt those particular types of uses. It has to be a valid discretionary permit. They can't be operating in violation of whatever the mitigation measures are, but we have put sound limitations on discretionary permits.
I guess, but we have some that probably go back
Yes.
prior to that.
Yes, and we cannot address those by adoption of this ordinance because they are operating as a vested property right.
So,
Okay.
Now, I would
That's exactly-
assume...
My inclination would be to put something like in that would basically say that they have an obligation as far as sound to use best management practices to try to mitigate sound.
And we have used that terminology in some of the more recent
But
CUPs.
you can't apply that
No.
retroactively?
And with respect to the second part of that sentence where it says, or which may be issued by the county after the effective date of this ordinance, I would assume, I'm not going to speak for George, but I would assume that similar to when we adopted the grading ordinance, when we now do discretionary land use approvals, we would say that they must comply with the noise ordinance, as opposed to a particular mitigation measure or condition of approval, except with respect to specific construction noises. You'll recall that we put limits on construction noise for the jail itself. We do that when there's an impact to an adjoining land use. We can still put specific limitations on noise and when they can operate. There's some similar mitigation measures I've seen on projects where actually, I don't think that project's come to you yet. There's where they have model homes, and they have limitations on where within the subdivision they can place model homes so that they don't impact any existing homes with people coming in and out and the noise and traffic related to that. So,
Okay, but you're saying that's a vested right, so
yes,
so by law, this can't apply to them?
yes.
Okay.
Unless of course,
Unless
of course you'll see in there it says unless they change what they're doing on site or do something dramatically different than we approve. But I'm not aware. Well, I am aware of a couple of those. Never mind.
But don't state them.
I'm not going to state that.
Just a minute, Gary, did you have a...
Well, I think Russ had some questions first, and then I've got just a few.
Janice, yes, you mentioned that you borrowed heavily from Merced and Placer. Did you take the opportunity to put in a call, or did you, Captain, to say how is your noise ordinance working for you? Is there anything you
Yes.
want to change?
Well, I'll defer to Captain Macedo, but Placer County, I was familiar with Placer County because a friend of mine actually worked on this. So I was very familiar with how this came about. And with respect to the technical issues, which I have absolutely no expertise in, neither did Captain Macedo, we did get in contact with the Sheriff's Office there, and you did discuss it with them.
I spoke to both the Placer County Sheriff's Office, the lieutenant that implemented this program, and I also spoke to the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office. They have multiple cities which they contract services for, and within those cities, they all have noise ordinances. So I spoke to two people at length. I got not only copies of their ordinances, but copies of their procedures. If you recall back to April, I had already spoken to the city of Madera and a few other counties that had different types of noise ordinances. So I think I've looked at these to a point of making me nauseous at this point.
But the consensus among those people that you talk to is that the noise ordinance and the methodology that is the definitions in here work for them. They bring up any things that they would want to change if they could? Or?
The noise ordinances did work for them. They worked well. Yeah, they would like to make some changes. Some of those changes are related to cost and equipment, and there's some of the other agencies have land use involved and needs to be a part of the noise, not land use, but code enforcement is part of the noise control team. So there was some suggestions. I looked into those. Those seem to be somewhat impractical here. And something to keep in mind too, this noise ordinance and the decibel-based decision. I'm very familiar with the Calaveras County judicial system, the judges that work here, and testifying on matters of methamphetamine, testifying on gang membership. They want quantitative